I think we're all looking for a little bit of refreshment after the last couple of years. We're hoping things are going to be new. The Denver church is praying. We have a Bring Your Neighbor Day that we're aiming for on May 22nd, and we're praying by May 22nd. We're fasting and praying that the pandemic will be more or less behind us at that point, that we will find some equilibrium of normalness by that point, and so we are praying and fasting. I hope you guys could join with us in that. For a little bit of normalcy in life would be great. Revelation 21, verse 1, and I'm sure you guys have read this says, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' He who is seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.' He said to me, 'It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all of this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children.'" This is one of my favorite promises in the Bible. When I daydream of what will one day be, it's to this verse that my thoughts turn themselves. The marriage of heaven and earth, new creation, a new place for the faithful to dwell in peace and without harry and without misery. I love the echo that this has from Isaiah 43:19, where God promises at that point a beleaguered Israel that he is going to make things new and do a new thing for them. And then right here in Revelation 21, in a similar way, Jesus from his throne promises a persecuted band of Christians, that's what the book of Revelation is written to, a group of Christians who are being heavily persecuted. And he says, what you're enduring now, don't let it trouble you, because one day I will make things new. He is the way. Yet not just for the future, not just for a future vision. He is the way for every problem that we face right now today. He can make all things new, no matter how broken and no matter how fallen. He is the answer for every problem that we presently face. It's easy to forget that Jesus was born a man in the same way that we were born. He felt pain. He felt loneliness. He was tempted. But unlike everyone else, he overcame. He is the answer to every question that we have about our fears, about identity, about sexuality, about everything. The church, our programs, the people in it are not the answer. They are an aspect of that answer, but Jesus is the answer. Hebrews 4:15 says this, "We do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." You know, there's a song that we used to sing a lot in church, though I'm not sure of its actual title, but we all know this song for the most part. Troubles come my way, Jesus is gonna fix it. I love this song for what it represents in my memories. Campus devotionals at night, church devotionals, Wednesday midweeks, and that song, and us singing it together, and all of us believing it. Sort of believing it in my case. I don't like pat answers. I don't like thinking about God as though he were a magician, ready to answer prayers as though they were his own parlor tricks. Some he answers when he feels like it, and others he just ignores, which is what it boils down to if the chorus of Jesus is going to fix it is something that happens at the snap of a finger. Thankfully, it doesn't work that way, though I know that we wish that it would at times. Go ahead and open your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 30. We're going to take a lot of our text out of that today. You know, I have been a writer since I was a little kid. I love to write, and I always have. I have journals dating back to elementary school. And whenever I feel like cringing, I open up those middle school journals and just read what I thought the world was, you know? But for whatever reason, I've always loved to write. I was telling a group of, the Rocky Mountain School of Ministry and Theology, I was teaching a class there, and I was explaining to some of the students about the need for creative stimulus, and especially if you're going to be in leadership and ministering. And I was telling them that on my computer are about 2,500 to 3,000 documents that I have written. And sermons, lessons, essays, you know, parts of books that I've started that I have not finished, devotionals. In total, somewhere between 20,000 and 30,000 pages of writing that I've done. That's the equivalent of about 60 to 100 300-page books. And almost every page of it, almost all of it, is me wrestling with what God's stated will is and the reality that I actually see, and how I bridge that gap somehow. How do I make sense of the experience that I have given my desires to follow God and his word, and then what I actually see? You know, and then next to my desk is this little closet, and in there's a box, and it's filled with these notebooks that I can't seem to throw away. And there's about 30 notebooks in it, and this is before I wrote everything in the computer, you know, but the first notebook that I have starts from the day that I was baptized. And so I've got about 30 notebooks after that of notes and all sorts of things. And I took out that first notebook that I started writing in after I became a Christian. And it's this just nondescript, black-lined spiral notebook. And I remember that when I became a Christian, and you got to understand, I'm not a scholar. I never was. I actually, in high school, I went to a small high school, but my graduating class was like 240, and I graduated 121st in my class. And so I was literally just one person below average, okay? So I've never been a scholar, but when I became a Christian, I endeavored to start my own concordance, okay? And a concordance, for those of you who may not know, is just, if you could just look up a word, and then it'll tell you in the Bible where that word exists. And so I wanted to make a conceptual concordance of my own. And so in this notebook, I just started with concepts, and then I found every Bible verse I could about that, and I wanted to write my own concordance, all right? Page 1 of my new Christian concordance is titled this, Miscellaneous. And that first page contains passages about speaking in tongues, about imitation, about salt, about blindness, and about God's will. And somehow in my 19-year-old head, that made sense to put on one page, okay? A pretty dizzying and nonsensical beginning to concordance. Page 2 was a little bit better, and it was entitled Repentance. And so I had a page of repentance. Page 3 was grace. Page 4 was love. Page 5 was another miscellaneous page, okay? And it was miscellaneous commands, and so on, and that was my first notebook that I wrote in as a Christian. But the way that I wrote in my notebooks back then is that they became kind of a catch-all for everything that was going on at that time. So as I'm opening up this notebook, I have dozens. To my shame, when I look at this, I'm like, wow, I have dozens and dozens of phone numbers of people that I had met as I was sharing my faith during that time. So I just have like Robert. I don't have no idea who these people are now, but I have their phone number in this almost 25-year-old book. And I have dozens of phone numbers of people that I was meeting along the way. I have notes from the first sermons that I was listening to as a young Christian. I have, some of you, this is gonna be hard to understand, but there was a time before there was Google Maps, okay? And so when you were gonna meet somebody, you had to figure out where you were gonna go. And if you didn't know where that was, you'd have to get directions. And they would explain something. They would go to this street and turn right. And so on this notebook, I have pages of directions of where I was gonna meet someone for Bible study, all right? And then every so often, I just have a little C+M, okay? And that just stood for Chris plus Megan, all right? And my wife and I, we got baptized, pretty close to one another. We were dating when we got met, and then we became Christians. And, the one thing about me becoming a Christian is that everything was uncomfortable for me. Like, there was nothing about Christianity that was natural. Like, I didn't like the Christians that much. I didn't like church that much. I hated hugging. And like, coming to church was like this. I don't like small talk a whole lot, and I'm not good at it, and I'm really good at making things awkward. And so, like, when I came to church, I would go to the bathroom 4 or 5 times just to fill the time gaps of when I could sit down and mind my own business, and so, but because Christianity was so uncomfortable, every once in a while in this notebook, I just have a little C plus M, because seeing that somehow made me feel better, it made me feel more comfortable. And so I've got this all over that first notebook. And then everywhere in the margins are questions. Just questions I have, like, why is it like this? Or why does it feel like this? Those questions, reading those questions from that 19-year-old version of myself, hoping that I would have some sort of epiphany, or that some great light would dawn on me and give me answers to those questions that I could not figure out. I remember being so bothered that I couldn't understand it all. But I also believed that there were answers that I just didn't have yet, and they were right around the corner. At the heart of it, even back then, I knew that Jesus was somehow the answer to all of the anxieties within me, all of the impatience I worked to suppress, all of the disappointment, all of the yearnings that could not be fulfilled. I knew that in some way, Jesus was the answer. That notebook had me thinking about all the ways that eventually Jesus did become the answer for me. And I would say that's the right way to say it. Jesus became the answer. Through time, through pressure, through adversity and resolution, Jesus becomes our answer to the needs that we have, to the questions that we have. Isaiah 30, verse 20 says this: although the Lord gives you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, your teacher will be hidden no more. With your own eyes, you will see him. Whether you turn to the right or turn to the left, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, this is the way, walk in it. So many times we have these big questions for which there are not clear answers. Because sometimes answers aren't necessarily right or wrong. Sometimes even the right answer feels wrong. And because sometimes the answer goes so strongly against cultural tides, the answer's hard to find. This verse has meant so much to my wife and I over the course of our lifetime, because we've had to make so many decisions about our family, about moving all over the country, about stepping in and then stepping out of the ministry and stepping back in, about coming to Chicago, about coming to Denver, all these things that were presented to us that didn't seem to have very clear right and wrong answers. So many of those instances, we had to make decisions without clearly knowing if we were making correct decisions. We would get advice. Don't you love it when you get advice about something? It's about 50-50, one way and the other. And now God, you tell me to get input, and the input gives me nothing definitive. We had to make decisions based on how God had remade and transformed our consciences over the years, on what we knew at that moment about his wisdom, and based upon what the Spirit did to our hearts after hours and hours of prayer. And then we did our best. We made the best decision we could. We made our most faithful decision and walked in that direction with a voice behind us saying, now this is the way. Be faithful. Go ahead and turn to Matthew chapter 4. We're so ill-equipped for what life is about to do to us. Remember New Year's Eve, 2019? Remember all the hopes and dreams we had for 2020? A brand new decade. If you just look at your plan, just think of all the vacations maybe you had planned that year, the places you thought you were going to go, the church calendar. Just look at that church calendar. God was just laughing at us as we were plotting and scheming for all the things that we were going to do. We are ill-equipped for what life is going to do to us. Too often we make poor plans in life because we don't comprehend in any fashion what's ahead of us. Too often our predictions are laughably incorrect because we have underestimated our situation. Too often we change and our hearts grow cold because we don't recognize the forces that are acting upon us. We are constantly made fools by this universe for how much we don't appreciate the forces that push and pull us here and there. I don't know if you guys know this, but we recently launched a new telescope into space. I'm super excited about it, okay? I'm hoping to make you excited about it in the next 5 minutes. This telescope, the James Webb telescope, it's gonna be 100 times more powerful than any telescope we've ever made, any telescope we currently have. Now, we've all heard of the Hubble telescope, correct? This is a low orbit telescope, okay? So this is revolving around there. The James Webb is going out past the moon. It's gonna be what they call an L2 Lagrange orbit. So it's gonna be out far, and it'll be the sun, the earth, and then this telescope, and it's gonna stay right there by the earth. It's always gonna be on, the earth will always protect pretty much the telescope from a lot of the sun's rays, but it'll keep the telescope cool while it's doing its infrared telescoping. Anyway, the Hubble telescope, which was cutting edge when it went out there, it was launched in 1990. And it absolutely changed the way that we understand our universe. In many ways, it helped affirm some things that you and I always believed. Some of the things the Bible alludes to. You know, in the year 2000, my wife and I were the campus ministers at MIT in Massachusetts. And which was ironic because I was such a terrible student. And there I was talking to the greatest geniuses of our age. And at that time, Cambridge, they would allow both Harvard and MIT, they urged Harvard and MIT to open up some of their guest lecturing space to people in the community. And there were these two cosmologists and astrophysicists who had come to lecture at MIT, and I had read about some of their work. And basically what they had done with the Hubble telescope is they were monitoring the supernova that were exploding on the edges of a myriad of galaxies. And the reason they were doing that is because these supernovae are so bright, they can easily tell which direction the those galaxies are traveling because of the red phase or blue phase. Hang in there with me, okay? This is gonna get interesting in a second. Okay? And here's what they discovered, all right? Up until that time, the predominant view of the creation of the universe is that it was an oscillating universe. Essentially, there's a big bang, it would explode. Gravity, however, would eventually win out and bring everything back together into a singularity, and then it would explode again, an oscillating universe. And that was their explanation for the creation of the universe. The problem was this research was showing that the universe was not slowing down. It was actually expanding, and not at a slow rate, but at an accelerated rate. And therefore, there was something going on in the universe we had no idea about. And so these two lecturers, they invented something called dark energy and dark matter. And basically, it is this matter that exists in the universe that we've never measured before. It's somehow in the empty space, and it acts as like an anti-gravity force. And it's pushing all the stars and all the galaxies further apart. And that's why the universe is expanding at an accelerated rate. This is a layman's idiot version of what they were trying to explain, okay? But it was amazing. It showed that there was no oscillating universe. There was a creation point. So these scientists, since Galileo, have been climbing up all these mountains of truth, coming up to these new conclusions, and they finally launch the Hubble telescope, they find out the universe is expanding, they get to this final mountain, and there's a group of theologians sitting there going, we told you. We could have told you this a long time ago. There's so much that's happening that we think we understand that we don't. There are forces that we can't even comprehend that are acting upon us right now. And there aren't great answers to them. Now ask yourself, are there forces in your own life that you might be underestimating and overlooking? Whether or not you believe it, the answer is yes. There are forces at work in your life right now that you haven't seen yet, you haven't anticipated, and you've grossly underestimated. It isn't dark energy or anything so poetic as that. The things we don't anticipate in life more often than not are mundane. A chance encounter with an old friend, a fight with your spouse on the way to church, a new pain that you feel in your throat or stomach that requires a doctor's appointment, a disagreement with your boss, your son or daughter acting more distant than normal, a holiday drink offered at a party, a hurtful comment given by a family member during what will likely be another tortuous gathering. The point I'm making is that there are so many times in life where we will be tempted into exchanging God's sovereignty and his answers for our questions for the sovereignty of something else that will give us the wrong answers. We give in to fear. We give in to panic, looking for a way by going through exit doors which lead to even more dangerous places. We grow tired and we look for rest in the wrong beds. We feel alone and find companionship in the arms of villains masked as friends. As a church, we try and equip every Christian for such moments. And as a family, we try and protect one another during those times. Yet there will always be forces that we don't account for, that there's no way that we could account for. There's no way we could have accounted for a global pandemic at the New Year's Eve party in 2019. There was no way to plan for that. There's another pandemic thing coming our way at some point. And in those incredible moments of temptation, and in those credible moments of fear where we're alone and we're outside the safety of what was normal, of what is routine, we have to rely on the person who gives good answers. There will only be one defense in the end. Matthew 4:1-4 says this, "Then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. After fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. The tempter came to him and said, 'If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread.' Jesus answered, 'It is written, man does not live by bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God.'" Now, we don't exactly know what the point was of Jesus going out into the desert, but we know that Jesus in his life accomplished what Israel failed to do. You know, the book of Isaiah is this tragic book in many ways, not just because it's detailing the fall of Jerusalem or the fall of Israel in the north, but it's also saying that this thing that Israel was supposed to be, this vine that it was supposed to be, this hope that was promised to Abraham that your descendants will be the light to the rest of the world, it fails in Isaiah. It says, "You're not the servant that I need you to be. I'm going to have to raise up a different servant, a suffering servant." And you see that the torch is being passed from Israel as being the hope for the world, Jesus being the hope for the world. And when Israel went into the desert for 40 years because of their faithlessness, Jesus went into the desert for 40 days to prove faithfulness. In every way, Jesus achieved what Israel could not. And that's part of Jesus going out into the wilderness, is to demonstrate that. And in this verse, Jesus quotes this passage from Deuteronomy, words spoken by Moses. And the whole passage, Jesus only takes a portion, but the whole passage says this in Deuteronomy 8:3. Just listen. "He humbled you, causing you to hunger, and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your fathers had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on the very word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." Do you see what's happening here in this passage? What's interesting is that Jesus quotes Moses, and he's proving to the people of God that for them, he could give them food when they were hungry. The lesson wasn't that God was letting them go hungry. The lesson was that God could provide them what they needed. But furthermore, the point of what Jesus is doing in his confrontation with Satan isn't that man doesn't need food, but that man can trust God to give him food. In the desert, the people yearned for food. God wanted them to understand, I can give you food. You want answers? I can give you answers. You have anxieties? I can fix that. I can do something about that. If you're lonely, I can do something about that. I can give you what you need. So food isn't what you need. What you need is me. I am your answer. You don't need an answer that fits your question. What you need is me, and I will give you what you actually need. Our world has a lot of questions to ask us as a church right now. Social issues which put us outside of things at the moment. Social issues like same-sex marriage, transgender issues, gender identity, identity in general. These are tough questions. They require thoughtful answers. They require loving answers, but they require answers. Jesus was a man, as described elsewhere in the Bible, as a man of many sorrows. Jesus had no family of his own. He had no wife. He lived without romance, and he lived without the hope of having a family. And yet, Jesus lived life to the full. He had a life of joy, a life of relationships, a life of love. Do we not think that Jesus is not the answer to the most difficult questions that the world could ever pose to us? We keep trying to answer those questions through means that are completely inadequate. The answers to tough questions are there, but they're in Jesus. That's it. These social, difficult issues that are surrounding us, that make us even more countercultural than we've ever felt before, we have to understand that the only answer to the question isn't some pithy intellectual argument. The answer is in Jesus. But those answers don't come as we wish at times. Man, they come in times of trouble, don't they? I mean, it wasn't enough to have a global pandemic. We also had to have the most contentious election in the history of our country. We also had to have unbelievable social unrest. We had to deal with gender issues within the church. We had to deal with the way that disciples were venting their frustrations online. And boy, that really helped, didn't it? So many issues got solved online this year. The answers that we're looking for come within our own decisions of conscience, informed by our personal walk with God. They come with quiet voices, not in fireworks. In that same voice, Jesus will make all things new. Although the Lord gives you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, your teacher will be hidden no more. With your own eyes, you will see him. Whether you turn to the left or you turn to the right, your ears will hear a voice behind you saying, "This is the way. Walk in it." We must learn to handle adversity and our tough questions through our own lordship to Jesus, where we will do God's will no matter the consequences, based upon our relationship with Jesus. Not only because it is our church culture, but because it's what we believe Jesus would do. He is our answer. He's the only one that we need, and the only one that will ever satisfy our weary souls in these dark days. Amen. Thank you very much.